One of the most common things I hear from newcomers to matcha is, am I doing this right? And is this enough foam? And while the image of a super frothy, microfoamy bowl of matcha is ubiquitous these days, no one really asks, is foam important? So today I'm here to run a little experiment where I will make 3 bowls of tea, one with little to no foam, one with a medium amount of foam, and one with a lot of foam. And I'll compare and contrast the taste and see what effect foam really has. And to answer the question, is foam really all that important? So if you have matcha, grab your whisk and follow along. To let you see what's going on inside my bowl, I'm going to switch this raku chawan out for this glass one. Where'd that come from? This chawan was made for us by the Nakamura Glass Studio in a resemblance of a classic raku chawan, and it's perfect for letting you see just how much foam I'm making when I whisk my tea. So without further ado, let's begin with the first bowl with little to no foam on top and see what that tastes like. As always, chasen toji. If you want to learn more about chasen toji and chasen care in general, check out this video. Afterwards, make sure your chawan is nice and dry before you put tea into it, otherwise the tea will clump, and that's no good. Today's matcha is Eiryoku, which is an uji matcha made by Rishōen, and it's one of our go-to Usucha matchas, so it'll be perfect for today's experiment. I've pre-sifted it into this nagatsuki so I can make back-to-back bowls for the experiment. As always, I'll use about 2 grams of matcha, or 2 scoops, to around 60 to 70 milliliters of water. So this low foam style is actually the style preferred by Omotesenke, which is the second largest tea school of the Japanese tea ceremony. They used to be the largest, and this was the most popular style of Usucha throughout Japan until, well, we'll get to that later. So to make this style of matcha, which is also known as Pwn Style, for reasons you'll see in a moment, you'll need to take your whisk and place it towards the bottom of the chawan, and whisk in a back and forth motion to make sure all of the tea is incorporated, but not too quickly because you don't want to generate too much foam. And once the tea is lightly mixed, you can bring the chasen to the surface of the tea and break down any of the larger bubbles that have doubtless formed, because matcha always foams even when you're trying to make matcha with less foam. And you can finish with bringing the chasen round in a nice circle to even out the tea. The results look something like this, with a thin layer of very fine foam with large open pools of foamless matcha, where you can see the actual particles of tea swirling around like moss in a pond, hence the name. This style of tea is made by a few different schools, most notably Omotesenke, which is the second largest school of Japanese tea ceremony in Japan. The first thing you'll notice is that the aroma from this style of tea is much stronger, as there's no foam in the way to block the aroma from escaping, so it's quite strong and potent. Texturally, this tea is very liquid, which I know sounds redundant, but without the foam, it doesn't have the same textural experience that matcha normally does. It's a little closer to your regular loose leaf tea. Taste-wise, this tea is very in-your-face, very punchy. There's no foam in the way to mask any of the flavors of the matcha, so any of its complexities or of its flaws, if it has any, are right there on the surface. So if there's any bitterness, you'll taste it, but if there's any complexity, you're also tasting it. One of the downsides, or at least idiosyncrasies, of this style of tea is that without the foam to hold the tiny particles of matcha in suspension, they quickly fall to the bottom of the glass. Bowl, usually. This one's glass. This means that the first sip is going to be very different to the last sip. The first sip will be a little lighter, while the last sip will have a lot more of the tea actually in it, so it'll be a little stronger. If you don't drink the matcha straight away, this will be even more pronounced if you let it sit for like a few minutes, like I've been doing while talking about it instead of drinking it. This style of whisking is much less forgiving on technique because any clumps will settle to the bottom instead of being suspended in the foam or dispersed via more vigorous whisking. So it's quite challenging to actually mix the tea evenly to break down any clumps, all without making a thick layer of foam. If you've never tried the style of whisking before, I definitely recommend giving it a try. It's a very different experience to the sort of full, super frothy, foamy style, and if it's a tea that you're really used to, you'll definitely notice a difference. The aroma is a lot more potent, and the taste is a lot more transparent and unmasked by the foam. So let's try bowl number 2 with a little bit more foam. I like to clean this one first. So now that the bowl is clean, we'll use the same recipe as the first time, 2 scoops of matcha to 60 to 70 milliliters of water. So this time we're going to be a little snappier with the wrist motion when it comes to whisking. Again, we'll put the whisk towards the bottom of the bowl and start whisking. Whisking in a back and forth motion helps incorporate air, which creates foam. And once you've created a little bit of foam, you can bring the whisk up close to the surface of the tea to break down the larger bubbles. So as you can see through the glass, there is a little bit more foam on this bowl, and you can also tell that the foam is more even and the bubbles are a little bit finer. This creates a sort of little cap to the tea, which prevents the heat from escaping. It also prevents the aroma from escaping. So if you stick your face into the bowl of tea, it won't be quite as strong aroma-wise as the one with less or no foam. All right, texturally, this is a lot smoother because one, the foam helps sort of make it feel smoother, but also the extra whisking helps make sure all of the tea is dispersed evenly and it's trapped in suspension by the foam. So it's much silkier texture-wise. If you're a big coffee drinker, this is closer to like a flat white or a latte, though not quite as silky smooth because there's no milk in this. But it's that sort of microfoam, but just a little bit of it. The foam sort of softens off the flavor of the tea, so some of the brightness has been sort of sanded down a little bit by the foam, if that makes any sense. This amount of foam is roughly modeled on what my tea school, the Ueda Sokoryu, practices, which is a thin covering of fine foam. So now we'll move on to our final bowl of tea, where I'll try to make as much foam as possible. As always, the recipe is the same, about 2 grams of matcha to 60 to 70 milliliters of water, but this time we're whisking in the urasenke fashion, so we're going to produce a lot of foam. To do this, you want to hold the whisk like this, with the pointer finger along the back of the chasen, and you can either hold the bowl like this, or like this to stabilize it, and you just want to whisk back and forth as fast as you can, with the whisk towards the bottom of the bowl first, as always, generating a lot of foam. As I've said before, this is much easier to do if the ball is at counter height and you're standing up, or if you're kneeling on the ground in seiza on a tatami mat. I'll have to make do. So once you've generated enough foam, you can bring the whisk closer to the surface of the matcha to break down the large bubbles into little tiny micro bubbles. So as you can see through the glass, I've made quite a bit more foam this time. That's like almost a centimeter of foam. Definitely much less aroma this time. This acts like an actual lid to the tea, so the foam and the steam can't really escape as easily. So let's give it a try. So texturally, this is definitely a different experience. The foam sort of fills your mouth, and it's much drier foam too, closer to like a cappuccino for you coffee lovers out there, like an old school dry cappuccino. The effect is similar to the last bowl, but scaled up, of course. The texture is smoother, silkier, because of both the foam and the fact that the tea is more evenly mixed. And the flavor is also a little softer, without as much depth and complexity as the first 2 bowls, but it's smoother. So you trade complexity for smoothness by introducing more foam. Unlike the first 2 bowls, the foam actually lasts to the final sip, so you have to do a little slurp to get this extra bit of foam in. As I mentioned earlier, this style of extra foamy, frothy Usucha is practiced by the Urasenke school of Chanoyu, and since the end of the Second World War, they have become by far the largest and most popular school of tea, both inside of Japan, but especially outside of Japan. And it is thanks to Urasenke that matcha is known in the US and outside of Japan, especially thanks to their previous grandmaster, Hoensai, who helped spread tea culture outside of Japan. And it's their school of tea that popularized this very, very foamy style of Usucha. Before Urasenke became the most popular, Omotesenke style, which is the first bowl we made today, was the de facto standard. So to sum up, foam does have an impact on flavor and also texture. More foam tends to mellow out some of the sharper, harsher notes of a tea, but it also masks some of the complexity. So depending on the tea that you're making, if it has a lot of bitterness or is a really complex, rich tea, you might want to vary how much foam you make. If it's something really bitter, maybe a little more foam could help mask some of those off flavors. But if it's super complex, then maybe too much foam could dull some of its interesting flavors. So you want to opt for a little less foam. I definitely encourage you to try this experiment for yourself and let me know what you think. Do you like a lot of foam on your matcha? Or do you prefer the sort of Omotesenke Pwn Style with less foam? As always, I'll leave links to the tea and teaware used in the video in the description. And if you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give us a like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day. I'm going to switch this Raku chawan out for